Make your reports complete and comprehensive. Remember that careful maintenance of the electrical system is necessary to the efficiency of any vehicle.
Well, kiddies, who wants to learn about automotive distributors today? Excellent. This, of course, is the distributor out of our 48 Chevrolet with a 216 project going on. And we're going to take it all apart, clean it up, test it, and get it back to looking good again. An automotive distributor is one of those parts that is often over-neglected. There is a lot going on that needs to be paid attention to, and most often if someone's rebuilding an engine, you pull it, you throw it on the shelf, and you forget about it until you take it off the shelf and put it back on the engine, and you don't do a thing with it. But there's actually quite a bit going on that is very important that we need to check out. What all is going on? Well, first of all, the most obvious function of a distributor, it's distributing the spark at the correct time to the correct cylinder. That's what the rotor's doing, going around the cap to the right terminal. Well, to do that, it has to stay in time with the engine at the correct time. So you have a gear down here that meshes with a gear on the camshaft, and that has to be in good condition. You follow the shaft down. On most engines you have a tang or a socket that meshes with the oil pump. So if this fails, not only do you not have ignition to run the engine, you don't have oil to lubricate the engine. Then there is a mechanical advance system, which we can't see now, for high-speed advance. We'll get into that later. There's a vacuum advance. On the older engines there would have been a manual advance. And you have breaker points to open whenever it needs to deliver the spark to the correct cylinder instead of grounding out. And you have an oiling system or a greasing system. Now the first thing I want to pay attention to on this is how worn the shaft feels, or does it feel worn in the bushings. And I'm just going to move it back and forth and make sure there's not a whole lot of play, and this one feels pretty good.
It's advisable to remove the distributor occasionally and check for end play in the bushings.
If there was a whole lot of play, that can really mess with your from the rotor to the cap. And it could also mess with the points. So you want to make sure that shaft is nice and tight. So first things first, just pop the rotor off. We have a good view of the points in the condenser. And we're just going to start taking those out. Take the screw for the condenser out. When your points open, like so, when the rubbing block, this is the rubbing block on the points, this is the cam on the points, the lobes here, when that rubbing block hits one of the high points, that opens the points here, and you have a gap. So that is when the high energy from the coil will then go through the rotor to the spark plug. Otherwise it's just grounding out. When this opens, it would have a tendency to arc across the 2 points. The capacitor reduces that tendency to arc. If it does arc, then you're just going to have, it's going to wear the points out prematurely, and it'll develop pits in there. So that's the function of the condenser. Need to get a little wrench. Just get the nut off the terminal there. And there's our condenser. Now we will go after the points. This screw is on a cam, and that is how you adjust. We will adjust the gap on the points later. I don't know if you can tell that, how it's wobbling around. Right, I'm going to take the wire off. Obviously, we will need to build a new wire. Take the second nut off the terminal here. Should be able to get the terminal out. Alright, now I think I'll go ahead and remove, going to get down to the plate here. I'm going to remove the clamps. These are the hold down clamps for the cap. I know that's probably obvious. Got a lot of junk in those, in that slot there. Okay, and there's a third screw this side. Whoa! About took my finger off. There we go. Here comes the plate. We'll inspect that later. Here you can see the mechanical advance. Now I'm going to get this grease cup out of the way. Grease cup takes a 7/16 wrench down here. Got a spring under the grease cup. Alright, now let's work on the vacuum advance. The arm of the actual canister unit is bolted to there, to the bracket, and then the bracket can come off from the housing. Remember to take a picture of this and keep your parts in order. Okay. I actually did that backwards, but that's okay. I can't separate the two while it's still on the shaft. So we'll get the main bracket off here. Go further. Spread that one. that off of there. And there we have our vacuum unit. Check that out later. So at this point you really have a choice to make. The original assembly used rivets and they peened them over or smashed them over there, and you need to grind that out and replace the pin. But that is how you get everything else out from the housing. Now, like I said, mine feels pretty good, but for the sake of the video I kind of want to keep going, so we will. Just know that you'll have to replace that pin, and if you're satisfied that the clearance between the shaft and bushing feels pretty good on yours, you really don't need to go any farther unless you suspect something is worn out inside the mechanical advance down in here, which is pretty unlikely, but things do happen. So let me go get the die grinder and we'll keep going. Taps of the hammer should get that out. There's all the old grease from the grease cup, but that is the bare housing. Okay, so all I'm going to do is check for the function of the mechanical advance and make sure it looks good. No obvious signs of binding or wear. I don't see the point of going any farther. I could. If you want to go farther, it's got these little locking tabs. You bend down, back the nuts off, should get this plate off, and then you're down to the weights. And obviously the springs are right here, but everything looks really good.
To check the automatic advance mechanism, turn the breaker cam in its normal direction. It should move freely and return when released.
Everything seems to function. Let me get that. There you go. From 48 to now, still working great. So it's time for some cleanup. So let's get busy. Okay, I got the shaft all cleaned up. Everything looks really good. The grooves are for the grease purposes of the grease, as well as this groove. I don't see any major flaws. The lobes all look nice and crisp. I don't see any wear at all. One thing I didn't point out earlier is there's a little felt pad in here. And make sure you don't lose that. But I'm going to call that good. This might be worth pointing out. You see on the tang for the oil pump, it's shiny there and there. There is a little bit of wear there, but that's the spot where it contacts the slot in the oil pump to turn it. I don't see any major problem with that. That should engage and to spin just fine for the rest of the life of this car. So Whenever I work on old complex machinery, I always just have a pretty deep appreciation for the people that not only thought this stuff up, but designed it, drew it, drafted it by hand, designed it by hand, built the tooling by hand, built it by hand, and it's all mechanical. It's all a mechanical product. It all works mechanically. They did nothing with the help of computers, of printed circuit boards, of anything. And they had a job to do and they figured it out. And it worked. It worked very well. Up until even up until the late 80s and early 90s. Vehicles were running around with technology that was thought up in the early 1900s. And I could never be that smart, I feel. I'm almost smart enough to work on the stuff that they came up with. But that's pushing it. You see the vacuum advance. I don't know if that'll really get cleaned too well or not. Probably not worth it. But we'll put all the little screws and washers and everything in there. And if you would be afraid of not getting everything sorted out, when you went to put things back together, then I wouldn't recommend doing this. Okay, and I'm just going to throw some simple green in here. Any industrial cleaner would work. Looks like I need to get more. And some water. And then we'll fire it up. Now they don't even have bushings listed in the old parts diagrams, but I'm pretty certain that there is a pressed-in bushing in there. And if you have to replace it, I mean, if you have to bore it out and press bushings in there, that's not the end of the world for a machine shop to do that. Now, I'm just going to take some high temp grease and just very lightly coat this, just so that it doesn't go in there dry. Should be fine. And that feels really nice, actually, so that'll be good. Now for the cam gear. That back in line. Get our new rivet on. Okay, this rivet was basically a looser fitting rivet. It was not that tight inside, and they just peened the two ends over to keep it in there. Okay, now originally they probably even used just straight rod instead of a rivet, and they just put it through and peened both ends over, or used a machine to do it, more than likely. So the head of my rivet's probably a little large. I may want to grind that down. This side looks about how the original was. So I'll probably take my die grinder and just take about half of that off, and that'll be fine. Okay, before I reinstall the Vacuum Advance, I'm going to test it. You should see the little arm get sucked in by the vacuum. Let's see, yeah, you can see that. There it goes. It does slowly bleed down, but then again, I don't have the greatest seal on this thing. It'd be best if I would have a piece of that, a flare fitting with a steel line that I could hook this hose to. But it does work. So we're going to call it good for now.
This mechanism, known as the vacuum unit, works off the vacuum line. Its principal parts are a diaphragm and spring. When the unit is advanced by hand, it will return easily if the spring is in good condition.
So I need to take this arm and get it back like that. And that had the screw with the brass nut on it. Has a little step on that screw. So you tighten it, that's a hinge point, you tighten it all the way, and where that step is can still rotate. Okay. Okay, we'll put the advanced control back on the housing here and get it roughly where it was. This hinge point was about in line with the grease cup. And when we time the engine, that'll change anyway. So that's where that goes. Now let's get the grease cup back. When you take yours apart, a little plug will fall out. That right there. Where am I? There we go. That needs to go back on the spring. I'm just going to put a little grease on here. And you'll see where it's been rubbing the shaft. It's concave there. And let's just put a little, just for fun, on the plug itself. And down in the hole it goes. And we'll put the base to the grease cup on. Alright, now I'm going to fill the base of the cup. Get my grease gun here in a second. Just squirt some in there. Okay. And we'll fill the cup up. Okay. I want to get the points plate back in, and on these there is only one way you can put it in there because of the hole pattern. And remember, there is one screw that only held the tab for the plate. And there is a little lock washer on that screw. So if you were like me and took everything, threw everything in a parts cleaner, be sure to get that back in there. I'm just going to loosely install that for the moment. Okay, now we're going to put our clips for the cap back on. And if they come all the way apart, the screw hole is on top and the slot for the clip is on the bottom. Take that, a screw and a lock washer, Okay, we're going to turn our attention back to the terminal. So we're going to put the stud inside the insulator, slide that through. And we have the fiber washer. And a flat washer, and then a lock washer, and then a nut, and then just for the sake of keeping it straight, another lock washer, and another nut. We'll just put finger tight on for now. And on the inside, Okay, I'm ready to put the condenser back in, but I'm going to test it first. Now you may be wondering, well, why don't I just buy an inexpensive little condenser, throw it in and be done with it? Well, unfortunately, the state of things, I would put as much stock in the quality of a brand new condenser these days as keeping with a possibly 50, 60-year-old condenser that's already in there. So we're going to test it and see if it works. I've got my multimeter set to ohms, got the leads in the right spot. We're going to put the leads together and zero the meter. Okay, now I'm going to touch the red lead to the hot terminal and the black lead to the ground. And what we should see is a number slowly going up to infinity. And that puts a charge in the condenser. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can see it climbing. Slowly climbing until out of limits. Okay? So basically, in the end, if you have a nice sweeping motion on your ohm meter, your capacitor is most likely good. Now, I did end up finding a brand new one in my stash of parts. I'm still going to install the old school one. I don't know if you can see. Might be too hard to see. It's got a cool old Delco Remy made in USA engraving there. But we're going to go ahead and install that. And it's always a good idea, even if you have a brand new set in there or a new condenser in there, throw another one in your glove box. Now, one thing I cannot replace at this point is my points. Apparently I got sent the wrong set. So I'm going to reinstall the old ones for the sake of this video. And I will get the new ones in there when I get them. So I'm going to put this screw is the eccentric to adjust the points. I put the pivot on the brass stud. Got to bend that spring down to the terminal. And down she goes. You see it's rubbing on the cam there. And they are open way too far, but we'll take care of that later. I'm going to put the screw in. And I'm not going to tighten it down. Get my fat fingers in there. Okay. Cinch that down good. Put this under the spring for the points. And then we can tighten up that nut. Okay, now, let's see how close we are here. There we go. Okay. What I'm looking for is the rubbing block on the top of the lobe. You can see that going up and down. The rubbing block is right there, going on the rise of that hex. So it's got 6 points, one for every cylinder. An 8-cylinder will have 8 points. A 4-cylinder will have 4 points. So you want that on the peak, and then you're going to take your feeler gauge. This is at 18,000, and you want this gap between the 2 points to be at 18. Now in my manual it says a brand new set of points, you want to set them at 20, and that is to compensate for the new rubbing block wears in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to adjust this cam. You see the gap getting narrower and wider there, and we're going to set that to 18. Put my gauge in there, close my points.
Place a small dab of Vaseline on the cam. Use care. Too much will damage the contact points. Apply a drop of light engine oil to the ignition point arm post and the rotor wick. Inspect the breaker points. These are in good condition. Burned, badly worn points should be replaced.
Now for the rotor. And the cap. Got a notch here, a tang there.
By golly, I sure fell for that one.